Good evening and welcome to the Lopatcong Township Planning Board meeting of November 2016. At this time, I'd like to invite you to join us in a silent moment of prayer, followed immediately by the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of our country. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this time, I'm required to state that adequate notice of this meeting has been provided, indicating the time and place of the meeting in accordance with Chapter 231 of the Public Laws of 1975 by advertising a notice in the Star Gazette and the Express Times and by posting a copy on the bulletin board in the municipal building. Beth, may I have a roll call, please?
Yes, members Fox, Johnson.
Here.
Chesky, Schreier.
Here.
Wolf.
Here.
Mayor McKay.
Here.
Chairman Van Vliet.
Here.
Alternate Fishback.
Here.
Alternate Grant. Here.
Thank you, Beth. Under the business for this evening, first order would be to approve the minutes of June 22nd, 2016. Has everyone received a copy of that? I assume yes. And are there any corrections, comments? Hearing none, those minutes will stand as published. Okay, we're moving on now. The next order of business is the resolution granting the preliminary and final site plan approval with variances and design waivers to the Phillipsburg Properties Group LP.
Just note that Vice Chairman Corral is joining us.
Has everybody received a copy of that resolution? Are there any comments on it, changes, discussion?
Mr. Chairman, it's really isn't a comment on the resolution, but it's something I just want to bring up before we do it. I guess the sign that goes with the existing building was approved by the Board of Adjustment, not the Planning Board. And I understand it's the applicant's intention to submit a second separate application for the signage. I don't know whether the sign's going here, going to the Board of Adjustment. I bring this up now because a couple people have complained to me about the intensity of the existing sign.
I looked at that tonight coming over. It is the daylight intensity.
Now, how about the date? The date was wrong last time I looked at it about 3 days.
I don't know if we have jurisdiction there, but people are complaining driving at night and so on. And,
but I remember that sign was supposed to have adjust the intensity from day to night.
Yeah.
Was that our?
It was one of, and it used to be that way.
Was that our condition or somebody? Or
no,
I'll
bring
it up.
I think it was our condition.
I didn't know if Mr. Peck would be here tonight. They've generally been cooperative. If they come back here, I'd like to bring that up in the sign discussion. If they go to the Board of Adjustment, Paul and George and Mr. Spicaro, they would make a note and at least look at that if it goes there.
Yeah, I was pretty sure that this past summer it was operating. Because nights when we went by, the intensity is now is extremely bright. It's almost painful to look at in a dark situation. So.
Mr. Campion, who was their operations manager, who appeared during this month, testified, and told them that we perceive that the lighting being emitted by this visual sign is a lot more intense than it was previously.
Yeah, I know they usually.
The complaint I'm getting is people actually at night, it's distracting and maybe even more so to some folks.
Yeah, probably the controller.
Go around, it's all conversation.
Okay, so any other discussion on the resolution?
Our professionals agree that this is everything that we we talked about in the last meeting. It's all in there.
Yes, Mr. Sarah circulated a copy of the draft resolution. A few comments incorporated my comments into the resolution. And I know the applicants, Terry had some comments, so it's all in there, in my opinion. So I'm comfortable with the resolution that's written, presented to you tonight.
Okay, and we're gonna make sure that the utilities don't get compromised as far as the capacity to handle this. I believe the letters were out, but we haven't heard back yet. Okay.
The applicant has to make application to the town council for the sewer allocation, so that's one of the issues that will have to be addressed.
Okay.
And actually, Mr. Campion advised him if he wants to get his allocation before the end of the year, send a letter to the town council to be on the agenda for the December 7th meeting, which is next Wednesday. So we'll make sure all those items are addressed. Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Any further comments? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the resolution.
I'll make that motion.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Beth, roll call, please.
Members Johnson,
Yes.
Pryor,
Yes.
Wolf,
Yes.
Mayor McKay,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Brown.
I wasn't here for the presentation, so I don't know if it's appropriate to vote on it, so I'm going to abstain, I guess.
Chairman Hensley.
Yes.
Yeah, all is here. And I'm going to ask alternate Frank because she was here at the hearing. Yes, so, okay, thank you.
Okay. Sure. All right, the next order of business we have is a report by George Ritter of the center designations. The outline, has everybody received a copy of that? I think it was an email copy, but they should be in the package here. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Mr. Ritter.
Okay, thank you. Basically, what you have is the beginning of a process that will eventually end up as amendments to the township zoning ordinance as they relate to the Highlands Center that's been designated in the town. And this is the first step in that direction. And what I'll do tonight is just as a brief overview, because obviously this involves your input in terms of ideas you might have, ideas you think that you might have missed, or ideas that we are proposing that you might find that you don't think are appropriate or should be modified. But as I say, this is a process. Essentially what will happen is as we go through this process and filter into it any ideas that the board might have or want incorporated into it, this report will be then finalized and sent up to the Highlands for their review. If they find it satisfactory and consistent with their goals and objectives, which I think they will, but the answer is that's part of the process, it would then come back here and that we would undertake an actual amendment to the master plan. And I would suggest that that amendment will actually be a reevaluation of the master plan so that we can keep the public notice as simply as possible, because if we just do it as a one-line amendment, it gets into all sorts of notice questions. And upon the board's approval then of the amendment to the master plan, the actual zoning ordinance to implement the master plan would come out and would be obviously sent to council for their review and approval, and go from there if they're comfortable with it. If not, there'll be revisions, further revisions. So this is just the beginning of the process, and I would encourage you over the next couple of meetings, I hope, to, if you have things, ideas that you might have that are different than ours or ideas we have thought, to bring them up, because now's the time to do it. It will be, because they will become part of the township's master plan and eventually zoning ordinance. What this began as is a look at the Highlands Center. And I noticed that yours aren't copied in the back, but the exhibits in the back essentially cover the area that's the Highlands Center designation portion of the township. And what we did is we went through and did a detailed analysis of the residential districts, the industrial districts, and the commercial districts from 2 points of view. One, whether or not the areas were appropriately zoned, that is it the type of use we'd like to have there, or is there things that we should reconsider? Also, we looked at the residential districts, because one of the things I've seen over the years is that in some of your older zoning districts, it has a tendency to create a lot of variances, because the lot sizes oftentimes are larger than the historic zone. Well, it wasn't zoned, but the historic land use pattern. So if an individual wants to add a room or change something, he ends up having to come back into the board for approvals, for variances to allow him to do that. So part of this analysis is to look at the districts and see how consistent the residential zoning matched the residential community that it was covering, so that hopefully we would have an ordinance that is more closely matched to what is actually on the ground, and lessen the burden on the residents to seek variances for what would be minor encroachments into side yards and that type of thing. So that was part of the analysis. The other was to look at use and see if there were any recommendations there. And the other part of this analysis was to look at the center designation and see if there were areas that we thought might be included in the center designation in terms of expanding the areas within the township that it might have an impact on. And it's particularly important because the center designation brings with it certain rights, in the sense that a property within there has the right to seek the extension of sewer and water. That doesn't mean you'll get it, but it bottom line opens that opportunity up to properties. And so having the right mix of properties in there is something we thought might be worth looking at to allow some flexibility for landowners to proceed down those lines if they can warrant it. So anyhow, to just jump into it quickly, and then I assume you'll have an opportunity to review it, think about it, and at the next meeting, my thought would be is when we might get serious about any concerns or recommendations you might have that you want to incorporate in or adjust for it. Essentially, we looked at the residential districts in the center designation, and generally found that they all actually had a pretty good fit to the neighborhoods within which they covered. The only district that we found that was really out of sync with the land use pattern that was there was the residential developments in your RB district. And I'm sorry I didn't bring a zoning map. The RB district is essentially this small group of, well, it's not so small, there's 40, 50 homes in there, but I mean, it's essentially the group that borders 22, and it's a mixed business and residential zone. And when we did the analysis as to how the zoning impacts that area, it was very clear that almost half of the lots were substandard, meaning that if you were going to make an improvement to your house or anything like that, you'd almost automatically trigger a variance, because our lot sizes were considerably bigger than what was there, and therefore the setbacks and requirements basically couldn't be met. We'd have to come in for a zoning change, not a zoning change, a variance for the use. And we also found that it was one of those districts which was interesting. It's a mixed residential business district, and we found that the majority of property owners are residential, but the majority of land is actually being used for commercial activities. In other words, there's more homeowners in the district than there are retail properties, but the retail properties actually occupy more ground per se in the district, which I think brings up a thought that you might want to think about, is that it's a district where the zoning itself might be discouraging or people for investing and maintaining their houses, because you have a very unusual mix of potential to be retail along with undersized residential lots that basically can't meet the zoning codes that are always in need of variances and relief. So one of the things that we thought about on this area that might be worth thinking about is actually going in and doing, we can do it one or two ways, but the one thing we thought was to go in, and right now the district is split. It has standards for residential and standards for commercial. the residential standards for this little area is the same as for the larger R75 district. Yeah, the R75 district that lays behind it. The only difference is the lots through this area are very, very much smaller, and so end up not being able to comply or even come close in most cases. The choice we thought was to either reduce the overall lot size for the R75 district and actually carry it up into the residential district here and allow a reduced set of standards to apply that would have them eliminate a lot of the variances, or go back in and amend the RB business district and essentially create a much smaller residential lot so that the homes that are there have a better opportunity to comply. And along that would come reduced standards. The other question that we should think about is whether or not we want to continue to mix the commercial with the residential, or whether or not we should start to concentrate the commercial activities along 22 and try to discourage them being scattered throughout the rest of the lot. It's a policy question, but it's something we think is worth thinking about. The other recommendation that we have in there, or thought, was to actually increase the minimum lot size for the commercial. The current standard is like 9,000 square feet. And it was our opinion that that really is sort of an in-between ground where it isn't large enough to really provide adequate parking or create an environment that is commercially oriented, but it's can really intrude into the neighborhood but not get you the quality of commercial activities that you might like to see. So we were suggesting bringing up the lot size for commercial activities to make, if they want to develop commercial, try to get them to consolidate more ground in order to do it. So that's
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, it's pretty densely developed, and a lot of it is built out already. I mean,
Yeah.
it seems to me no matter what you do with the zoning, you got what you got.
Well, you do. The only question we have is for the people that are in there in terms of maintaining their homes or doing any improvements to it.
Yeah.
Do you want to make them always come in to do variances? It is pretty fully developed.
That I understand, and you're making it easier for them to do something. I saw what you said here, but you also said you were trying to, turn that into a business district and get the residential out. A lot of those are people have been there forever.
Well, yeah, no. What I suggested in the report is that we actually create an actual residential district and begin to confine the businesses to their own district.
Yeah.
So you don't have that random mixing.
Yeah.
And see if that actually helps strengthen that neighborhood. Because I think right now, if you live there, you're caught between our zoning and whether or not you want to improve your house. You're basically sitting there going, well, I could end up with a commercial use right next to me next week. And then when I go to do something to my house, I trigger variances and have to trot into the board and basically stand here and make a case on why I should be allowed to do it. So it has a tendency, I think, to depress its reinvestment in the neighborhood for residential. And the retail lots are of such a small size that doesn't really encourage anybody to do anything particularly good there. Anything there. So it sort of is in conflict with each other. So our recommendation was to actually go in and limit the retail, spread of the retail in that neighborhood, and then actually produce a set of lot standards that would allow the residents to maintain their properties and make improvement without dragging them in front of one of our boards. That's really the thought. But it's something you can think about. We don't have to, that's the purpose of this, is to just think about some of these areas. So that's really sort of the recommendations on the residential. The rest of the residential zoning in the center, we found to be very consistent, produce very few variances being developed, and also we believe it's consistent with the Highland standards, and they shouldn't have any trouble living with our zoning pattern. I think the thing we should also point out is one of the advantages of having the center is the township-based zoning actually can stay. We don't have to think about modifying it for the overall Highlands regulations and changing our use pattern or anything else. it's a pattern that we can maintain and carry forward into the future. The industrial districts, the ROM district, and the board has talked about this in the past, and these recommendations are essentially what we had for the ROM district, and that is essentially we're going to make the concrete manufacturer, well, first of all, we're going to make the district from a permissive district to one where the uses are specifically defined. As most of you are aware, we have the ordinance itself is constructed in what I call permissive zoning, because what it says is there's a group of uses you can have, they're such as but not limited to, which obviously means that anything that you can construe to be close to that may or may not be permitted, which is a rather open-ended thing. So one of the things we're trying to do is define what can actually go in there, so that we have a very defined group of uses that we will permit, and if somebody wants to do something different, then obviously they have to come back and make their case to the board.
George, can I be a pain in the...
Yeah, go ahead.
I got a lot of questions. As I read through this, there were a couple things where you said the board wanted this or the board wanted that. Some members of the board did. I don't think those things have been decided yet. And I don't have a problem if you say some members, but I don't think people have voted on this. And in particular, the permissive zoning, there's some history on that in the court case, and we laid out where we had a history of that, and the court commented on it. And I don't know if you can limit it to 4 or 5 things. I'm not saying we can't, achieve an objective that people want, but I'm just not there yet.
Well, that's fine. I guess what I'm saying is this is still open-ended.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see this as the be-all, the end-all.
You said it was the start of a process, and
Yeah.
I think you've given us a great start here. So,
Well, just to move the process along for the evening, the way we looked at this was to actually create definitions that can, first of all, it allows the concrete manufacturing facility to stay. It basically also changes it from a conditional use to a permitted use, if the board feels comfortable with that. The asphalt plant itself is better defined, so that the only thing it can really do is make paving products, basically paving for roads, and it prevents them from expanding that into various types of asphalt manufacturing, the actual concrete and that type of thing. And we do that by referring back to the OSHA standards. They have a code system for classification, and we've tried to tie the definitions to those. The only other thing that...
Excuse me, on that, I don't know, I don't have copies of all those OSHA standards.
Well, I'll be glad to provide them. That's not a
Now,
problem.
you're saying that any asphalt facility that could go in there would be permitted to make unlimited amounts of asphalt, provided it would be used to pave roads?
Yeah, essentially, yes, they could make asphalt paving material in any volume.
In any volume, so there's no restriction on them. The restriction you seem to be imposing is one that would not allow for recycling of old asphalt.
Well, they couldn't grind it up. They also couldn't make asphaltic products. In other words, mix the oil, the asphalt, actually create asphaltic concrete. The actual material that they make, they mix with the aggregate to make it. Paul can better explain it than me, but it will limit what they can do. It won't move it into a chemical plant. In other words, they will be mixing basically the asphaltic concrete with the aggregates, and they can make product out of that, some of which is rolled on your roads, or they could make a paver, but that's about the extent of what they can do.
What type of thing would they ordinarily do that they would not be allowed to do?
Well,
It's limited basically to producing bituminous concrete.
yeah.
Which is what you pave roads with.
That's what you use to pave.
So they could have a 24/7 operation there, 80
Yeah.
feet tall, producing
And they're
as
conditional
much of that
approval.
as the device would produce.
They also are required by the state to use a certain amount of recycled material, recycled asphalt material. So they'd have a stockpile of the recycled asphalt at the plant as a product of,
So they would be recycling. Because there's language in here that says you won't be allowed to recycle.
Recycling was approved as part of their permit.
Their conditional approval.
The conditional approval,
That
which
was
is,
the last vote during those hearings.
well,
We'll take a look at it. I don't have a,
Well, I mean,
but in
they've
terms
got
of,
the conditional approval for
yeah.
that.
Well, no, as far as
Plan, I
they
don't,
have,
you know,
yeah.
anything further coming along, I don't know.
no, if we said right now you couldn't have an asphalt plant, if they were to succeed in court, they would of course be able to build one, but no one else could, and that's the way I thought you would consider it.
Well, they've
That's
already
not
been-
the way
it's
this
already
is
been determined
written right
that
now.
That's not the way it's written, no.
Yeah.
So if you just say they can't have asphalt, an asphalt plant in the township, then if they're successful, they'd get to build theirs, but nobody else could build additional ones. And I thought that was the kind of the impetus here, was that we didn't want many of them coming into town.
You know what, yeah, and I don't have a problem with that concept, but then you get involved of the precast concrete versus the asphalt, and what the testimony was in the court, and what the judge said. So that's why I say, you've laid out the discussion, but I don't think there's a consensus here yet.
Well, it's all right.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go back to the court case, the court basically found that the concrete manufacturing plant and the asphalt plant were virtually the same process. So it becomes a question. All I'm posing is that if you prohibit one, what do you do with the other? The one thing that is put in here is that both the concrete, just for your reference, for the concrete manufacturing plant as well as the asphalt plant are considered primary polluters by the Highlands, both of them. And essentially what this does is incorporate, one of the changes that we would have to do to be consistent with the Highlands is incorporate the fact that if you are designated one of these high polluters, that you would have to provide what they call best management practices at the facility. In other words, how to control runoff, how you have to do your stormwater management, how you have to control the spills and that type of thing. These plants would both be subject to that requirement, and that's what this code would do, would actually make them have to meet best management practices for their industry. And that is one of the requirements of the Highlands. So,
But isn't there a big difference in that the one that's there already makes a very limited amount of product because it only makes pre-molded products that sit there, and then when somebody wants to buy them, they get trucked away. They're not producing oodles and oodles of concrete to pave roads and sidewalks and everything every day. So
Well,
it's a much smaller production.
well, yeah, they can manufacture as much precast stuff as they can sell, I assume. Yes, that's right. This ordinance, by definition, would not allow the bulk production of concrete. That's one of the things that is not covered in the classification that we picked. In other words, you couldn't put up a concrete manufacturing facility and just manufacture concrete, which would then you'd go out and use for roads, paving, that type of thing.
But you could do so for asphalt.
Well, that's all they could do. But yes, they could do that. Well, that's what this is what this is structured for. As I say, we're open to suggestions and where you want to go, but the recommendations in here would make those kind of modifications if the board feels they're appropriate.
George, a question. With the concrete manufacturer over there, you're telling me all that stuff that he has stockpiled is already sold?
No, he can stockpile. Our ordinances cover storage of materials and everything else. No, he has variances even to
Yeah,
extend.
because he's expanded all the way out to the Power and Light right away.
Right.
With their permission.
With the board's permission.
No, with the Power and Light's permission.
Oh, no, true, but also with the board's permission to increase the amount of impervious cover and that sort of thing on the site. That was granted years ago to allow him to do that.
I just wanted to ask, and going on that, could you explain to me what the tier 1 well protection area is?
Yeah, around, and then I'll get in. The concept is around various public wells. They have different tiers that have been described. Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, I don't know if there's a 4. I think there's 1, 2, and 3. And there are actual zones that are drawn around the well that basically are a way to assess the risk of polluting the well if you put certain types of uses around it. And one of the things that also is in the Highlands regulation is high polluters, in this case the concrete plant, or the asphalt plant. Not that they are, both of these comply, but if they could not be built in a tier 1 wellhead area. They couldn't be put in that close a proximity to a public well, which is not, neither of these two uses that are out there today it really affects, but that would be in the ordinance, that high polluters could not fall within a tier 1 wellhead.
Are there any wellheads there?
No, but the place it does affect you, and it's in the report, we went down and looked at what these regulations would do in terms of potentially creating non-conformities. And what we see is that by clarifying the definition of what concrete manufacturing is, there's, make sure I get the SCC Enterprise, a ready-mix concrete place that I think is located, this map, I might be wrong, but it's sort of in that general area. And I don't know how heavily it's used, but that use would become it would be permitted, but it would be a non-conforming use under the current definitions we're suggesting be adopted here. Also, the one that you have to realize, and I suspect most of you know, the chemical plant, which is a high value polluter, potential polluter, I'm not saying they are, but clearly the public wells are all sitting on their property. They're clearly within the tier 1 area, and as such, would be considered within that tier 1 area, in that area, would be considered a prohibited use, and any expansion would have to come back in front of the board.
That's what I was asking that question, because I thought it said that they are, excuse me for interrupting, but I thought from reading this report, I'm like, what do you call it? I thought that they were in that tier 1.
They are, and this would make part of them non-conforming.
Right.
Because they're manufacturing chemicals in too close a proximity to the public well. So that's one of the ones that could be impacted if these were developed. There's an auto repair shop, which we do not see as a major problem. And we pointed out here that the concrete manufacturing facility would be, what did we say? What did we find on this? Make sure I don't. Yeah, that the concrete manufacturing facility and the asphalt plant has to meet the best practices, which is what you and I have talked about. So that's generally the recommendation for the ROM district, would be to deal with making the uses more specific and making those subject to best management practices that might be considered primary polluters, and essentially that's the recommendation for that zone. Generally, we're pretty comfortable with it the way it is, at least from our perspective. The other,
George, can I
yeah, go ahead.
make one more comment on the RON? Going back to where you talk about the combination of large lots, excellent access, and potential public sewer, maybe the potential public sewer, I'm less optimistic than most folks there. We've seen them use up most of our allocation. Physically, I don't know where they go. I'd feel more comfortable if you described that just as you described it to us, that being in that zone, being in this district, they have the right to petition.
No, that's fine.
And
Yeah, no, I
just
agree.
leave it
When I
like
said
that. I'm not sure how much potential there is there.
well, that's true between the gallery, but you're right. I understand what you're saying.
And physically getting someplace. I mean, we have problems in Roseberry, and I don't know, the Berry Plastics is a private sewer. I don't know, they'd have to go a long ways. It just, there's a lot of hurdles there to provide sewer to that area.
One of the things that we strive to do with the Highlands at the time when they created the industrial center for the ROM zone, Ingersoll, and that whole, under that umbrella, allowed them to have sewer and water extended to those properties.
Right.
Whether we ever were able to do it with capacity was one thing, but it left us with the possibility of doing that.
And I understand that, and that's what I'm suggesting George describe instead of
maybe elaborate on
I'll
what he
make it
said.
clearer
Yeah.
of what's intended there. The only other general comments we had, and one of them is a very minor one, the board may not be interested at all, but the township never defines anywhere in their ordinances public uses. Many towns have a zoning category for various public uses, that is to say parks versus government buildings versus properties they may own, but they just want to leave them in the residential district or whatever they're in. But it's one thing that is missing from your districts. It's something that we thought you might want to think about because it spells out the standards by which the town would work. And generally, these districts are very permissive, but they do put restraints on them in the sense that they would come back in and require that you have to have at least an informal presentation to the board, that kind of thing, so that the public is aware of what the town might be planning to do on one of their parcels. So it's something to think about. It's not required by the Highlands, nor is it necessitated by anything that we saw, other than it might be well to define those types of areas. The other thing I thought, that given the fact that we've approved the redevelopment area for Ingersoll, if you recall, it's something that's never been used in the zoning ordinance. We have an industrial mixed-use district that overlays the ROM, what was the Ingersoll tract, which allowed a mix of industrial, office, and retail uses based on the size of the parcels. I think, quite frankly, the original intent was envisioned a various mixed-use project on the Ingersoll piece was the main reason for doing it. We now have the redevelopment plan there. We have at least a sense of what's going to happen there. But I think it's probably best to just repeal that. I don't think it really is going to accomplish anything anymore. And I don't think that it really will have any beneficial effect, because most of the properties that are left in the industrial district there today can't be assembled into a large enough parcel to actually accommodate it. So I would think that one of our things that we would consider is actually repealing that overlay district. The other aspect of the plan that we might want to think about is that in the Highland Center designation, if you go out to the Phillipsburg Mall, the designation cuts off where the mall is basically included. It cuts across here. There's a parcel that lays behind the mall that is part of our senior citizen zoning district. And it allows, I call it moderately density. Right now, the ordinance allows 6 DU per acre senior citizen housing. Since it is outside of the center, there's little or no potential for them to get sewer and water extended to that piece of ground. And quite frankly, from my perspective at least, that's one place that you could actually envision relatively higher density development next to the mall in that area. Also, the district does have an affordable component in the ordinance. If someone would choose to develop it, it would have a component in there for affordable housing. The current ordinance allows 6 DU per acre and 12.5% set aside. So I was thinking that one of the things we might want to do is petition the Highlands to actually include that piece behind the mall in our center designation, to at least give them the opportunity to try to do it. If we don't, then the zoning that's on the property probably doesn't have any fit at all, because they can't get sewer, they can't get water, so you're not going to be able to do 6 DU per acre. The other thought I had that we might want to think about is it's probably a good parcel to actually encourage development on in town. And one of the thoughts I had is whether the board wanted to consider possibly actually allowing a greater density to get a higher percentage of set aside in the district, say for rental housing, going up to 20%, in order to try to bring some economic incentive in there to actually have somebody think about trying to solve the problems with the site. And still keep it as senior citizen housing, which if someone would develop it, you'd get a residential component. It would be for seniors, but it would also be, for lack of a better term, there's no children. It would be a rateable that you'd be building that wouldn't necessarily put kids in the school system. And also its location next to the mall and the various facilities actually makes it sort of an ideal site for multifamily housing. So bottom line is that's an area I think we ought to think about too. And that's generally where we are in our just overall view of how we thought we might want to proceed, and the board kick it around.
George, how big is that parcel? There's lots in there that are Lopatcong lots, and there's lots that are Lopatcong lots.
Well, no, the actual lot itself, there's a rather large lot. It cuts, but this is being developed. That's where Sycamore Landing is.
Right.
The mall sits right in here, and then this piece is a single piece that's under our zoning ordinance. It's a fairly large piece. I don't know the exact acreage. I'll be honest with you. I didn't look it up tonight.
Yeah, I think there's adjoining parcels that are in right?
What?
Who was it that attempted to develop that a while back?
Yeah, there was.
Somebody tried to give it to sell it to the county instead of selling it.
I honestly, that I don't
Senior
remember.
housing too. is for
I'm not saying it didn't happen, I don't remember it, but there was an active development proposal there that died for a series of reasons, and my comment is, it seems to me if you want to keep it, it has to be practical. We'd have to adjust the wastewater management plan, and to me, the only place it could go is to POHAT through their mall connection, and I don't know if that's practical.
Well, I agree with you, because there's a lot of problems with it. One, the mall road is an issue. I mean, that was kicked around over who had rights to access the road. The only question I had is the current zoning on the site doesn't fit at all with the realities of what's out there. They can't even apply for sewage because they'd be in violation of the Highlands. And I thought it might be a piece that if there was enough economic incentive, somebody might try to overcome the difficulties. I mean, we all know it's difficult. And I don't know if even what we're talking about here would encourage anybody to do anything. But it's an area that I thought was worth thinking about. It can be left the way it is, right? But I don't think they can, in all honesty, if they came back before the board, I don't think there's any realistic opportunity that they could develop it as we have it zoned today.
And just my observation is, to me, it would probably make more sense to match it to the zoning that's practical, rather than say if somebody wanted to spend enough money, maybe they could do something with it, because I don't even know where they'd go, how they'd go.
Well, I'm not sure. Well, I agree with you. What was told before is they had to go back through Phillipsburg. I mean, that was my understanding out there.
Yeah, and the way the mall gets here is through POHAT. So
I'm sorry when I said I meant back.
Yeah, it winds up all roads point to Phillipsburg.
Well, what I mean is they'd have to connect actually through the abutting township system. We can leave it the way it is. If you would think of zoning it, then you'd have to zone it for large enough septic lots. You'd actually have to go back.
Well, in the end, you have to make the wastewater management plan work too. And I don't know, if it's not practical, maybe it's destined for septic, and whatever matches septic is what we talk about, so.
Well, then I'd say that if that's the case, then we ought to think about probably rezoning it back to something that would just be accommodate on-site septic.
I was going to say, I think it might be worth it to think about drop the senior citizen housing back there.
Yeah.
I think Highlands has it as agricultural protection.
Well, right now, if we don't put it over in the center, there's very little. We'll be doing cluster residential.
The problems are almost insurmountable, because you got Lopatcong Creek running along there, which is a trout stream, and you already got the 600-foot designation problem. I mean, when they explored the idea of trying to build that development, DEP would not allow them to cross, either with the bridge or go under or over or anywhere near that creek. So, I mean, you've really limited the access coming in only to the mall road that's coming around there.
Correct.
Wasn't there a deal with Sycamore Landing that came in here, and they were going to allow access into that property?
They tried to get the access into that property, but the deed restrictions on it allow if the mall, we would have to sue the mall as the township to take the easement of the road from the 22 entrance and around, I guess it would be the west side of it to where they would make the connection to go down into that property, which is where Sycamore Landing is,
Right.
the mall is, and then they go down to service that property. They tried to strike a deal to incorporate that connection to a connection that would come in from Sycamore Landing. It's set up to do that if they can ever come to an agreement with the mall owners
Right.
to allow them
Which
to
they,
do that.
I guess they never
The
did.
only other way that the township could force them to have access there would to invoke the easement rights that are spelled out. I'm not familiar with all of the things of it, with the deed restriction that's in there that allows the easement to go that way, whether we want to choose to go that way or not. But I think the cost and problems doing something like that is probably getting to the point. I believe it's still Haman property, isn't it? That
Yes.
owns it. So they've never been able to market it because they're running an extraordinary amount of money for it.
I thought the deed restriction on the wall said that ring road was going to be accessible to the undeveloped property.
That is correct, but I think there's other.
The reason with Sycamore Landing is not the undeveloped property of the Tolsburg Mall. Sycamore Landing was trying to use the ring road as an access.
Correct.
But they would have to cut across the property that didn't belong to them.
Well, in the one point where they make the connection, the two properties above.
Yeah, Sycamore Landing had to leave their
Sharing the
property.
road. They wouldn't necessarily cross the mall property, it would come into that property, and
The corner behind Sears.
it's not, in the topography there is not the greatest in the world.
Right.
To come up there, so,
The roadway had to leave the easement that was set up by mall developers,
right.
because they had to set up an acceptable alignment and get the site distance. to do that. So that was an issue with mall developers.
So, but I don't think, anybody soon is coming in there to try to do anything, so.
Okay, well, then I guess the question really then to the board is whether one, you want it in the, if it's worth putting it in the center designation. And then what the zoning should be. Because clearly, if we think that you never can get sewer there, then we ought to just zone it appropriately. And then they'll still have to struggle with it, but I mean, it's.
What would be appropriate zoning?
Well, if you're gonna put a septic field out there and that sort of thing, the absolute minimum I would think would be 1 acre. If you're gonna put septic fields over the place, it probably should be a little bigger, but that's probably the minimum.
You got the creek there.
Depends how the ground perks there too, so.
Well, we don't know.
Wouldn't like some kind of warehouses or something be appropriate?
Well, yeah, well, I guess that's the other question. Do you think there's a commercial enough market that if it was rezoned back into commercial, somebody take an interest in it to put stuff up behind the mall? I don't know.
I don't know what the marketability is, but you got things like self-storage and so on where the septic demand is virtually nil.
Exactly, there is no facility.
Yeah, I know, and that's why I say I don't know what the market is. You go into Piscataway, they're all over the place. I don't know what the demand is here.
Well, I don't either. We have two, but I know of two. But, well, that's the other option, I guess. You can always look at converting it back into a commercial or a zone and seeing if anybody will pick it up and roll with it. That is the other option. Then you have to get it back in the center.
We have stuff on 57 that's on septic, strip malls and so on.
Yeah, they can't get much.
Something low density, but
Anyhow,
another satellite store or something, I don't know.
I think it's an area worth thinking about, let's put it that way, while we're going through the process of doing this, what we want to do with it. And that's sort of the summation, and like I say, I think the board should think about it, the members should think about it, and we'll take that under advisement as we go forward and try to get this thing tailored in a form that everybody's comfortable with and then get it up to the Highlands. and then start that process so we can finally get the zoning in place. It looks like the town, well, I don't know, I can't say that. I was gonna say, it looks like we're moving toward getting our COA straightened out, which means then we're getting closer to being able to actually comply with all the Highlands regulations.
Just as a comment, looking at the, talked about the COA adjustment, there may be something in the works with going on that we'd have to consider that for rezoning in the area. So we're looking at taking and converting the highway business along 57. So we might want to see how that's going to develop. It looks like it might be moving along fairly quickly and be coming to a resolution on that. And we have to incorporate
It should be
into
incorporated. If that's the final decision, yeah, but it should be incorporated in this. All the current things that we should include as much as we can.
Right.
At this stage, because to go through the process and eventually revise and adopt a new master plan and send it up to council, we want to get everything in it we can do at one time, just to wrap all the loose ends up, but also because this is all covered under the Highlands brand money to pull this together, so it's not a cost to the town directly.
That was one of our objectives in the past year, to try to, instead of having 3 or 4 different, master plan revisions, we would undertake it under one large one that the Highlands can pay for.
So that's it. I'd suggest we think about it, and we just have a time at the next meeting where we can, kick it around again, and we'll move it toward hopefully getting a consensus on where we want to go.
George, I thought it was thorough and it hit on all the issues. It's given us something to discuss, and I'd like to thank you for the effort.
I'd like to thank you also. There's a lot of information in there that we'd have to do a lot of digging into our ordinances and local zoning laws to come out to find out, what lots where. So
Yeah, no,
thank you very much.
we have very good inventories now on the lots.
Yes.
and what's vacant, what's not. But anyhow, like I say, it's a starting point, and it's a process that does involve the board, so don't be bashful. And, lay the issues out, and we'll see if we can get them worked out. Good.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions of George? No? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, at this point, well, let me move. Okay, right now I'll call for public comment. Anybody from the public have a comment on anything? Seeing none, we'll move on to a motion to adjourn.
Motion. I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed?